Hello and welcome back to Sean's Thoughts. Today is another episode where I'm going to be reading from this book. As you can see, it's a book called I Am the Word. It's a channeled text by Paul Selig. And we're going to be starting at page 30 today. Now, I highly recommend that you follow the link that's in the description and you can purchase this book from your own copy of it from Paul Selig or through however it is that link gets to his webpage and explore the amazing wonders that are in this book. And that's essentially why I'm sharing it with you now. I apologize if you're coming here live for the live stream at 5:55 today. However, I decided that I would start when I feel ready, and I feel ready 10 minutes early. So welcome if you're joining me live right now, and if you're not, well, I appreciate your attention anyways. Thank you so much. And today we are going to sit here below this pavement end sign because we all need to know where the pavement ends. I thought this was a really interesting, unique, funny sign, so I thought I would sit below it and read for you today. So let's get going. I'm picking up on the middle of page 30, and let's read. You were all in agreement about many things. You were all in agreement the pigs can't fly, and that's appropriate. Pigs can't fly. However, you were also in agreement about things like you were also in agreement about things that don't withstand the laws of gravity. And these things are like, I am not allowed to know myself as a divine being. Only a priest can release my sins. Only the Father in heaven can solve this problem. This is too much. This is not for me. These are three examples of the way you hold larger patterns of thinking, and we will give you more. We will say this to you. The belief that civilization has been here for many thousands of years is a collective belief on this planet. It is a collective belief because the evidence that you have found to date supports it. So you go into an agreement with it and it becomes your reality. If you believe that there is only one dimension of experience that you can access, and that is a shared belief that you share, then guess what, everyone? That becomes your experience. If you believe that you can shift and move between dimensions, and that becomes a reality in a way that can be proven and experienced, everybody will suddenly say, oh yes, we can move within dimensions. But in order to get to that place of consciousness, the matrix of belief, the system of belief that has withheld consciousness, must be attended to with directly. So the problem is, you say you want spiritual growth. You say you want the alignment to the Christ, but the ceiling keeps hitting you on the head each time you try to go higher. And the ceiling is the belief system that you have held, that others have held, that you hold as a community and as people about what can be possible. So if we ask you this, what would happen if there was no ceiling? What would your response be? There has to be a ceiling. I have to know what the limits are. I have to know what the rules are in order to play the game with myself. Do you understand this? Well, there is a ceiling. There is always a ceiling, but the ceiling changes as you align to it and go higher. As you outgrow your clothing, you don't expect that the clothing will fit you. You expect to require new clothing. Well, you all have to require the ceiling to get higher and higher and higher as you ascend in frequency. When you ascend in frequency, you lift your vibration. As your vibration lifts, the requirements for your growth transform themselves, and then you are presented with new opportunities to align to the next level of consciousness. And so it goes up and up. You do not grow from infancy into an adult overnight, nor do you grow into your Christ self, the self who knows the truth about her own divinity in fullness in one quick reading of a book. Now, I think this is a great point to touch upon. The first part is that changes in our belief systems don't necessarily happen overnight. Now, you may have or at least I did, have cognitions and insights that started to change one's belief system or my belief system. However, it took a little while to go through. I remember often talking about when I first started on this journey of awakening with the audios of Ram Dass, it took me many times before I could even sit through an entire 5 to 6 minute audio and listen with intention, not just falling asleep. And so that's one important part, is that when we begin this journey, we are at different levels of reception, what you were able to receive based on our past history. So oftentimes when we don't get it the first time, no problem. How I found when I first read this book was that I didn't really get all of it. This is my maybe 7th reading of the book, but each time that I read it, I find something new in the book, and that's referred to as spaced repetition, but yet it's because when we read something, each time that we read it, we are a new person. Now, the other thing that I want to kind of talk about is the idea that there is a ceiling. There's a ceiling with everything that we do, because when we're doing something, regardless if we want to blame it on an external demon or entity that's blocking us, or some sort of system or structure which is limiting us, it can also be ourselves, based on the idea that we have the ability, as we are who we are, to accept incoming information at the rate which we would be comfortable. The book often talks about, you can only accept the frequencies or the information in which you can align to, that you are ready to. Because sometimes there's different aspects of disclosure, for example, that are challenging when we first hear them, because they essentially completely oppose our current belief system. And our belief system isn't something that's going to be changed overnight. It's something that takes slow augmentation sometimes, and oftentimes we require other information which won't be triggered into our field until we've got to that point in which we were when we read what we read. So I hope that makes sense, but let's continue. However, what we will tell you may surprise you. In the beginning of it is hard. The understanding that you are Christ and that it has been made manifest is the key. Once the key is in the lock and the door is open, you are on the run, because the electronic configurations that require to bring them into form can be brought to you with your intention to require it. If you say to someone, I only want a big house with a big lawn, the realtor is not going to show you studio apartments. They are going to say, this is what you requested. I will bring it to you. If you say to the universe, I want to manifest myself as my own divine being, as my Christed self, as my higher self embodied, however you want to decree it, you have to understand that what you set in motion is a process. And once the process has begun, the process continues. You may pause, you may break, you may wander away, and you may wander back. But the evolution of your soul cannot stop itself from forward motion. And your soul already knows that this is the key to your growth. So we will say this, once the key is in the lock and you have said, yes, I am on my journey, your own soul will manifest itself, and the opportunities you require to bring this growth into achievement will present themselves one day at a time. Now the manifestation of Christ is not an easy thing. It is not like getting a new hairdo. It's not like if you change your clothing and then walk around in a robe and make people feel better. This is not the point at all. To be the Christ simply means to be yourself in full realization of your power as a piece of God in action. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. This is the decree. You are Word. You are an aspect of God being brought forth in light. As you journey, as you access this information, you become Christed in consciousness. When you become Christed in consciousness, you ascend. When you ascend, your vibrational frequency elevates and aligns in new patterns that cannot hold the old, and the old falls away as you rise. When you rise, your landscapes change. How it feels to see the world, how it feels to see the self from a higher vibration is markedly different from what you can imagine, because you understand your role as an aspect of the Creator. You move rapidly to bring to you the mandates of your soul's choice. When you are in your soul's choice, you achieve that which is required for your soul's achievement. It cannot go any other way. So first of all, that line, of course, I believe is from the Bible, from John, I believe. But there's so much to unpack here. I should have underlined it as I read through it this morning already. The point is once you start on a healing journey, there's really no holding it back. I mean, once you take that blue pill, as the movie The Matrix put it up, you're essentially moving forward. And, at times you'll find yourself challenged and you'll walk backwards. You'll start to feel more comfortable with what was known, just kind of similar to what happened on The Matrix with that guy who decided to betray his friends. And I'm not saying that you would betray. However, we do at times get uncomfortable with the change. There's a part of this book which we'll get to, and it talks about, or it gives you the metaphor of dealing with trauma is like opening up a cave that's had a boulder in front of it. And when you release that boulder, when you move that boulder and you begin the journey, you are releasing essentially things that are within that cave. And they may feel uncomfortable at times, but yet there's a level of trust you could have in yourself in order to venture forward regardless of how uncomfortable it feels. Now, the other part that is being pointed out about here is the idea that we are of God, we are of God. And that's what I find the Christ consciousness to be all about, is that what Jesus was saying, in my understanding, is that we were all of God. We were all of what he was able to do. That he was essentially planting a seed, and that Christ consciousness was, or is, the idea that Christ is a frequency. Christ is essentially a vibration which all humans have the potential to embody. And that frequency is more in alignment with, I guess, see, part of my mind while I'm talking right now, I'm essentially talking, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about what I'm talking about. But the way that I've come to understand the Christ frequency or the Christ consciousness is it's a level or a frequency in which we can align to. And that essentially it's the idea that as we release traumas and we move into a higher alignment, that we're releasing a lot of the things that were perhaps holding us back from that resonant frequency of what Christ consciousness could and should be. So we say to you that this is the process that you are choosing has consequences, and the consequences make themselves known, and they will be your pride, your fear, your loathing of the self, and the body releasing in ways that will become apparent. Because these are low frequencies that must disband, you must release, that must go away for good. If you are to light the balloon, the sandbags that keep you tethered are those things of lower frequency that cannot go for the ride. Now you have an investment of these things that control you. They keep you safe. They keep you dormant. They keep you in the illusion of separation. How can there be a God that loves me if I feel such pain? How can I be in a war with my fellow man and still be in God? How can I know myself as good when I secretly believe I am bad, or I am failed, or I am unloved by man? These creations, self-loathing, fear, war, are all creations that must be cleared from the self as the self ascends. How this process happens will be part of this book. In subsequent chapters, we will address in detail how one goes about taking out the laundry, as it were, and how one goes about releasing the past in the ways that liberate the present. Now, I think this is a really important part to stop, because we're on page 34, and in this page we're essentially talking about what the rest of the book details, what this book is truly about. And what I've come to understand more so is this book, while it reigns from a place of Christ consciousness, it's more of a manual to help us release those lower vibrations that would allow us to get what the book claims as Christ consciousness. And there may be religious people out there who will immediately think or hear the word Christ consciousness and basically push the book aside. What the book really is a manual, a self-mastery manual to help each other, or to help the reader, more importantly, to release those lower vibrations of fear and hostility and anger and jealousy. Because if you look at life as a hot air balloon, the idea is that all of those bags, those weights that the hot air balloon has on them, those are traumas that have been held within our field. But when you're able to learn how to release those, it allows the hot air balloon, you, to rise higher. And the higher that you rise, the better the alignment and the higher the perspective you have. When you look back down at the world from a higher perspective, you can see how the streets are interconnected. You can see how the patterns of the streets perhaps would allow for a better route to your job or to the mall or wherever it is you wanted to go. You know, now that we have a GPS, of course, most people will just blindly follow the GPS, but that's blindly following technology. Remembering the route to get to where you want to go and being able to find the most efficient route, even when a traffic jam comes up, can be seen from that higher perspective. So that metaphor of being in a hot air balloon and looking down and finding a better path to where you want to go is a really good example of releasing traumas. When we release traumas and we don't get triggered by situations, when those situations come up again, we can oftentimes mitigate their issues, mitigate the fear or the hostility. When the news is playing, a triggering event, however, whatever it is, war, famine, desperation, political conflict, or political theater, if we have a higher perspective because we've released the triggers and the trauma that essentially cause us to turn red, then we're able to see it from a different perspective. And that's what is a really good takeaway from that part. How does one go through ascension is different than one goes through the daily life. When one is in ascension, one is rising and the tethers are releasing and the past self is being discarded as the new self incarnates in the body that you're in. The new self, the Christ itself, is incarnating in the body you are in. The old self walks away and does not come back because the old self was never truly there. It was an illusion that you were separate from God. It was an illusion that you were not loved by your fellow man. It was an illusion that there was war. Now, we are not discounting physical experience. Physical experience is very real. And you turn on the television and then there's famine and there's war and there's all these strifes that preclude people from believing that such things, the things that we speak about, can be so. But we will tell you this, on one dimension, these things exist and they are your teachers. If you will learn from them and they will release. On a higher level, we say that they are an illusion because the physical reality you exist in is an illusion as well. Now, I want to stop right there because right here, this goes into the alignment that a lot of the things that we perceive to be in the world around us, they are an illusion. And you can kind of look at this as a changing narrative. We sit there and we watch movies, and movies tell us how reality is. They tell us how the court systems work. They tell us how the judicial system works. They tell us how the democratic voting system works. They tell us how communism works over in other lands. Essentially, they tell us everything. And then we hold all that in our brains, I guess, and we create the reality. We create the expectations of how systems work. See, my own case in point with this is before my store got broken into, I once owned a tailoring store. I had an idea of how insurance companies would treat me because we had insurance on the building, but yet that information came from watching movies. But yet when I had my own experience with the insurance company, because I, hoped for the best, it actually worked out pretty well, and it wasn't like what I had seen in the movies. And there's other times when we watch things on TV, especially news, especially that red-colored news station. when they focus heavily on something, it gets us to believe that that's the way it is. Well, I went into my own life and I decided to start watching a different news source, and lo and behold, I found out that a lot of the news that was pushed on there wasn't true from other sites. And so when we essentially believe that the world is how it's been presented to us, especially when, we're sitting in conversations and we hear someone's story about their brothers, friends, sisters, girlfriends, mothers, nieces, uncles, nephews, who tell you a story about something because, they're trying to relate to you. But in reality, that's their own personal experience, and it honestly has absolutely zero bearing on how your own predicament would turn out, unless we subscribe to what they happened, and then we essentially fall to the vibration of that fear which you've been presented. Now I want to reread this part again right here. Now, we are not discounting any physical experience. Physical experience is really weird, really very real. And you turn on your television and there is famine and there is war and there are these strifes that preclude people from believing that such things, the things that we speak about, can be so. But we will tell you this. On one dimension, these things exist and they are your teachers, and you will learn from them and you will release them. On a higher level, we will say this is an illusion because the physical reality you exist in is an illusion as well. Does this sound like a cop-out to Paul, who is questioning us behind the window? And we will say no. As you begin to understand your own ascension, you will begin to understand that those creations within and without you have contended with have been manifested by you individually and collectively, and can be released individually and collectively. One man cannot war with his fellow, and that brings peace. And that peace will resonate. One man can ascend to the Christ consciousness and change the world, and this has been done on a singular level many times in history on this plane. It is going to be done in many, many, many people as this planet begins its ascension into the new millennium of peace and understanding and truth. That has been the promise. It is the promise. And those illusions that will continue to present themselves, the self-loathing, the fear, the war, may continue in a low frequency for those who require it. But it will not be the case as you ascend in consciousness. As we have said earlier, the view changes, everything changes, everything is changed. Now, I think this is a perfect example of it truly is about the consciousness that we are in. Yes, there are things that can come up to us that challenge us, but when we have an elevated understanding of the situation, perhaps we are aware more than our neighbors of what's actually going on, we will therefore deal with the situation differently. If we hold compassion, for example, in all of the things that are happening in our world, when someone comes up to our lawn and, drives a car or has their dog pee on the grass or whatever it is, when we have more compassion, when we have an elevated understanding, and elevated simply means a more compassionate understanding, recognizing that not everyone sees the world the same. Even so, it could even be that the dog, for example, peed on the lawn and the owner didn't even recognize that the dog was doing that because the person was in a phone conversation that had taken their attention away. My point being is when we have a more compassionate understanding of why things are happening, when that situation comes up, we'll deal with it differently. And that's the idea that having an elevated level of consciousness simply means to have more love and compassion and a higher vibration. Then we are able to deal with things differently. And while we can live in the same world, we will deal with situations differently. And when we deal with situations differently means that we don't yell and scream at that person who had the dog, which triggers them into yelling and screaming back. When we come at with more of a respectful way, the situation will be de-escalated right from the beginning. And so that's a great example of how we can live in a world with people of varying consciousnesses and have completely different experiences. And of course, as we start to let go of a lot of the fear, the guilt, the shame, as we heal those traumas and we rise in our frequency, we see things from a different vantage point, we're also less apt to get in confrontations and to essentially become angry because we think what we thought, and that created what we're experiencing. Now, when you invest in the self on a daily basis and you walk around saying, I'm going to work on my stuff, or I'm going to talk to a friend, or I'm going to go to the doctor and decide my problems, you are working through stuff. You are telling your friend and you're talking to the doctors about your problem. But that is not ascension. That is a process, and a beneficial one, of healing the emotional body on a day-to-day level. While you may lighten the load and while you may transform your consciousness through those actions, they are actually very different from aligning to the Christ consciousness and are going to take you on a ride. Now, everyone, guess what is on the ride at this time? No, I'll say it over again. Now, everyone, guess what is on the ride at this time? No one can be taken from it. However, the degree of understanding you receive about your own self is what is happening. Why is it happening? What is going forth will change everything as you contend with the manifestations of your own Christed self, embodying as you. Guess what, everyone? This is the time. This is the time. This is the time. And the wake-up call has been heralded. And this is the aspect, the treatise of an aspect of a creation that is happening on a global level in different vocabularies, in different treaties, in different ways to speak to people about what they need to bring forth their manifestation in the divine self. Paul is right, who is raised with no religion at all, has alchemated to a vocabulary that we work with him because it resonates culturally and it signifies great truth. The same truth can be told in the mystical vocabulary that would reach people who did not believe that Christ was so, because there has been many Christs, there has been many teachers, there has been many who have ascended and are way showers, and every religion holds these people in regard because they resonate, and the resonance of them has created structures. See, one of the things that I think this book essentially shows us is that those people that major religions have revered as, people who were divine, that perhaps that their message was that, in a sense, as I've often talked about with the idea of Jesus, is that we are all divine. That because we are all of God, we all have perhaps the powers at varying levels to affect our own reality, from our own health to our own manifestations of our own reality. And that perhaps there's a level or that glass ceiling that we're unable to see, which has limited us to do that. But yet, oftentimes, it's our own beliefs that limit us. And those beliefs, of course, can be affected by programs and situations and, societal structures, which wouldn't prefer us to know how powerful as Homo sapiens that we are. And throughout our history, we've had many different characters, or not characters as in, comic characters, but people, beings, archetypes, they even say. People have come into our world and shared with us the belief that we are greater than we believe ourselves to be. And those characters or those beings have been turned into saviors, removing us from that. They are our kin, they are our families, they are, examples of who we could aspire to be. Now, the structures of religion, we would say, are only beneficial to the extent that they hold thought in a productive way. And there has been a way to hold thought through organized religion that has been beneficial to man. But true religion, if you can understand it, is a belief system. Everyone has religion. Everyone does. Even the atheist has his religion. Now, organized religion in its current state has become blasphemy to many because it holds within it hatred, fear, and control. To liberate the soul means one needs to be free of fear, and any religion that dictates a fear-based doctrine of hell or damnation cannot liberate the soul. One will never leave the house if they are told that what is outside can kill them. And if that is a lie, then there would be many people living indoors without knowing the sunlight. So guess what, everyone? If you release it at this time, at this juncture, any beliefs that the journey that you're about to go on will imply your blasphemy and your fear of damnation to be incurred, we say to you now, it ain't gonna happen. See, that's one of the challenges that I had with modern religion, is I always thought it was very interesting, I'll say, that at one hand they were telling us that God loves, but yet at the other hand we were told that we would go to hell, as if God's love was somehow also including, judgment and going to hell. And I never really understood that. I believed that God was a being of love and compassion and understanding. And so when I started to understand the ideas of hell and, judgment and being condemned and such, damnation, that didn't resonate with me. And a lot of the religions I found out there, they had this idea that you either followed their religion and you went where they were going, or you didn't. And a lot of those religions were, similar, very similar religions. And these people that they had the right religion, if you didn't follow their version of the religion, going somewhere that wasn't great. And it was almost like a sales pitch. See, my history with jobs is I was taught to be a very great salesperson, and I could understand different techniques of manipulation. And, sales itself is a manipulation. Urgency close, or the fear of missing out, or giving people a selected number of choices and getting them to choose between those choices rather than them allowing to explore their own choices. Those were all techniques. And I often found that as I talked to people from various religions, they essentially employed a lot of those techniques, those sales techniques, when they were talking about their own religion. And so there are many religions out there that, they believe that what they believe is the superior belief, and all those who don't believe that they're going somewhere that, they don't prefer. And to me, like I said, that was just a sales technique. When my belief of God is that God is a loving, compassionate, loving, and forgiveness. And forgiveness, God's forgiveness, for me, isn't about paying a church money to get forgiven every Sunday for all the things you did from Monday through Saturday. That forgiveness is about, realizing what we have done, the blunders that we have made, and speaking to God directly and being forgiven directly. And so, anyways, I'm going to leave it right there. I hope that this is of value to whomever. If it is, I definitely encourage you to let me know in the comments. This is an introductory, in a sense, a conversation, an exploration that I'm doing with this book, because in the near future, I plan on holding some sort of book club where we can get together, read through, and discuss different selections or sections of the book. And so this is kind of an exploratory way of, me sharing these little bits of this amazing book. I Am the Word by Paul Selig, a channeled text. And my name is Sean, and you're here with Sean's Thoughts, spelled a little bit differently. And I hope that you will let me know what you think, and perhaps we can get into a space where we can read more and talk more and discuss more. If you have left any comments during this podcast, please understand that the phone that I'm recording from is over 2 meters away from me. I've been drawn in to step inside of the camera, so I'm unable to see any and all of the discussion, as well as my own previous experience with doing live streams, is that sometimes 0 people show up, and other times I have an awful lot of bots jumping into the conversation and, saying really silly things. So I don't even bother looking at it. In the future, perhaps when I'm more set up into a studio-like area, I will have a computer screen in which I can read the app, read what the comments are, and we can get into full-length discussions. However, until then, I'm signing off. Please click on the next upcoming video, even if you're only able to stay there for a few minutes. It definitely helps the channel when people are clicking on the video that pops up after. And of course, all those other things, like and subscribe, of course. But more importantly, comment for self-reflection. If you found something within this, a cognition or an insight or something popped into your head like a little light bulb, leave it in the comments. Perhaps it'll trigger someone else to have their own cognition, because we are all collectively ascending. And that's what this book is truly about. It's essentially a manual to help us release traumas and to get to where we're going just a little bit quicker. And so if this resonated with you, definitely listen to the ones that we had before. They are as they are. You may learn something. And regardless of that, save this podcast, this playlist on your browser, and come back for the next episode soon. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.